Welcome to Doors to Hope and Healing, an inside look at the many facets of work that is happening at the Department of Children and Families, between our staff, the families we serve, and our community partners. My name is Jaqueline Ford. I have had the honor of working for the department for almost 30 years. And although I may be familiar with many of the topics we bring to you, I have invited experts in those fields to help us dispel the myths and misconceptions that can often be barriers to our work. Join us as we open our doors and invite you to have a seat at our table. Dr. Bozak, thank you so much for being on the set of Doors to Hope and Healing. It's a pleasure to have you here to talk about children's mental health. That's what, the topic today. We're coming off of the heels of Suicide Awareness Prevention Month, which was September. And I think it's so important for our viewers, for the community to know the work that GCF is doing about child mental health. So can you introduce yourself to the viewers before we get started with our questions?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Dr. Stephanie Bozak. I'm a licensed psychologist, and I work for the Department of Children and Families as the Behavioral Health Clinical Manager. And in that role, I oversee children's mental health, which is part of a larger division of behavioral health and wellness here in Connecticut.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm so glad that we have you at DCF. How did you first get involved in child mental health and suicide prevention work?
Absolutely. Great question. Being a psychologist by training, of course, mental health is of course a priority in promoting wellness overall. And I think prevention is just the best way to do that, because by promoting prevention, you're really catching people upstream. You're preventing what the negative outcomes could be and providing that hope and resource before things get too far along. So prevention really is that first key step, and I think it's so important for us to normalize the conversation about mental health and wellness, just the same way that we would talk about, if we have a cold or if we are not feeling well. So in that same way, prevention is talking about, I want to prevent me from getting sicker, whether it's emotional health or psychological or even just physical as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. What do you find are the most challenging aspects of this work that we're facing?
Yeah, I think one of the most challenging things is that while we've come a long way related to talking about mental health and wellness, there's still a stigma associated, right? I think for some, talking about how we're feeling emotionally or psychologically is still difficult for whatever reason. So often we hear, I'm a little under the weather, but we don't necessarily do that with how we're feeling emotionally. And so there's still a little bit of a stigma associated, and, talking about it, making it normal to ask for help and seek help if somebody is needed is so important, so that people don't feel alone, ashamed, or anything else that can kind of come with that feeling that they're experiencing it alone.
And how are you working to reduce that stigma, to start those conversations, to get it more normalized?
It's a great question, and there's been a lot of effort throughout Connecticut to really normalizing that conversation. We're very fortunate that we've had a long withstanding system of 211, which is a crisis hotline, and now nationally we have 988. So there's a lot more attention that's happening to mental health, really normalizing that conversation and letting folks know that there's help out there. People sometimes don't know what they don't know, right? And so they don't know where to turn if they are feeling like they need that support. And now with 988 being national, no matter where you are, you can pick up the phone, talk to a crisis worker, and really get that support and help immediately. Connecticut also has mobile crisis, where if you need someone to come out to you because your child is in crisis, or you're not feeling that you are getting the support that you need, mobile crisis can actually meet you where you're at. And so it's really great that we have that system. And now we've also included an urgent crisis center. And the way that system is built is just like we have for physical, right? If you don't need to go to the emergency department, but you need to get seen because you maybe have a broken bone or something, Similar to that process, here in Connecticut, we have urgent crisis centers where you may not need an emergency department because of the type of crisis, but you do need some behavioral health support. And so urgent crisis centers can offer that.
And where do we have the urgent crisis centers?
It's a great question. We have 3 of them throughout the state, and you don't have to go to the one that's in your town. If you're closer to the one in Hartford, you can go to the one in Hartford. But we have one in Hartford, Waterbury, and New London. And those agencies are the Village, which is in Hartford, Child and Family Agency of Southeastern Connecticut in New London, and then we have Wellmore in Waterbury.
And is it just a walk-in type of a setting, like a walk-in clinic would be for healthcare?
Exactly. So no appointment is needed. A family can just bring their child in, and they're open for anybody to just walk through those doors, and they're able to receive them and meet them where they're at. And the nice thing is that it's not just, we'll see you now and then goodbye, but they'll do some follow-up, right? So you'll get a referral to what the next best course of action is, whether that's an outpatient clinic or something different, but they'll also be checking in and making sure that there's follow through, right? So that you're receiving the help that you need, not only in the moment, but ongoing as well.
Wow, what a great model, and that's definitely a way to destigmatize, that problem, that crisis, whether it's a temporary crisis or some longstanding trauma that the child's having. How do you feel that the pandemic has affected children's mental health?
Oh, it's a great question. We talk a lot about the isolation that we all felt during the pandemic. And now that we've sort of returned to what our new normal is, right? I think the anxiety rates, the rates of depression and isolation has really just increased for our youth. Anxiety is one of the most commonly diagnosed the anxiety disorders in general, right? So not just anxiety, but post-traumatic stress disorder, all of those types of anxiety type disorders are really very, very prevalent. And so increasing that isolation, increasing the pressures that come with social media and going back into school has really increased how our youth are able to cope with the feelings that they are feeling. So I think, post-pandemic, we're really just trying to get back to how do we connect with one another in a meaningful way and really reduce some of those anxieties that are associated with isolation.
Sure, and we all were isolated, so it's just that much more difficult for children to know how to manage and get back to what that normal was before.
Yeah.
Can you explain DCF's role in addressing mental health concerns for children and families? Like, what's Connecticut doing?
Absolutely. So many people don't know, but DCF actually has the behavioral health mandate for children. So what that means is that we partner with the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, who is our single state authority for mental health, on all things children, right? So DCF has that portion where we're responsible for really building the landscape of what mental health in Connecticut looks like. So we do a lot of work with the federal government to kind of look at what our system needs and distribute funding so that we have the supports and resources necessary for our families here in Connecticut.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that, and I think that's why this show is so, we were talking offset about how helpful this show is to our viewers who are watching the community to know, DCF's role in children's mental health.
Yeah.
Suicide amongst teens has become obviously a serious concern around the nation in Connecticut. Can you talk to us about, what those statistics look like? What are we facing with regards to suicide?
Absolutely. The fortunate thing is that Connecticut does fairly well with suicide. That being said, in 2022, the Centers for Disease Control said that suicide was actually the second leading cause of youth death. Right? That's pretty harrowing.
Yeah.
And in Connecticut, there was a school behavioral health survey that surveyed high school students, and they said that about 28%, so 1 out of 4 almost, right, said that their mental health was not doing well. Of that, they said that 8% of students had attempted a suicide, right, in the past year. So while our numbers are pretty good nationally, it's still a problem, and one death is too many, right? And so Connecticut does a lot. We have what's called a Connecticut Suicide Advisory Board, which is a coalition of people who are interested in really preventing suicide, whether they're clinicians, counselors, or people with lived experience, either themselves or have lost somebody. And so the Connecticut Suicide Advisory Board does a lot of prevention work. We have regional suicide advisory boards that does work locally, where they'll do trainings for community members to just know about what are the risks. How do I identify somebody that has maybe a need? And it trains people on how to ask questions, because I think sometimes we don't ask because we're scared of the answer, right?
Yeah, very true.
So the Suicide Advisory Board really does a lot of training throughout Connecticut to help people know, what do you do with that answer now? How do you help support somebody? Whether that means talking to them yourself, referring them to the resources that we have in Connecticut, like 988, or the other clinics that are around Connecticut, or other counselors that could provide that support.
Is there an age that they're more likely to see those numbers? When you talk about the 8%, is there a certain age range that you're finding is more vulnerable to these suicide attempts?
Unfortunately, we're starting to see that the numbers are getting younger and younger. When you look back about 5 years ago, most of the numbers were young adults and teenagers. More recently, we're finding that younger and younger, I think just, again, everything that we've talked about with the isolation, the anxiety, not knowing who to turn for help. One of the other statistic that was really shocking to me was that 40-something%, I can't remember exactly, but 40-something% of students said that they didn't have a trusted adult to talk to. So combine that with these feelings that they're having, right, of isolation, anxiety, depression, and then not knowing who to turn to.
That's almost half of the youth in school.
Yeah.
They don't have that person. And are things being done within the school systems themselves so that kids know to call they can call this 988 number?
Yes, it's a great question. And Connecticut actually passed legislation so that all student IDs in Connecticut should have the 988 number on the back of their IDs. Not every student has a school ID, but those that do have that number on the backs of them. We're also partnering with schools to make sure that they have signs and posters up to let students know that they can call, chat, or even text. We know that young people love to text, and so nowadays we're even promoting that more in our schools as well.
How long has the 988 number been available? Did that come through the pandemic?
It came out just about over a year ago, and so Connecticut has actually, in our year mark, which was this past spring, Connecticut has done really well in terms of our answer rate. Nationally, we rank among the highest so that people aren't on the phone waiting for that answer, but we are answering within 15 seconds to make sure that people are getting responded to, right? We know that crises can happen in an instant, and so Connecticut does a really nice job of being able to respond to those who are in need in the moment. And this is for adults and for children. And kids, again, we're finding are texting a little bit more than adults.
Wow, yeah, so they can use that as a texting tool. So if a parent or a guardian is watching, I know all of these attempts to create the awareness so kids know, what's out there. Yeah. But what if a parent or guardian is watching and they're concerned about their child's mental health? What steps should they take to get those interventions?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? We all want to know, how do we support those that are around us? And really the first step is asking the question. A lot of times, again, parents are a little hesitant. What do I do with this information? But really just making a space where it's open to talk about and really listening, not to fix anything, but being there and listening to their children. I think, by asking those questions, it can open up a really honest dialogue. And then from there, that's where you go to the resource, right? One of the things that I've heard from those on our lived experience subcommittee of the Suicide Advisory Board is that they often felt like people would just ask just because they had to, right? It was just a checkbox. I asked the question. But really asking to listen and to hear what the youth say, and then being able to say, okay, I know you don't have that hope right now. Let me have that hope for you, and let's together figure this out, right?
Yeah.
So asking is really, really important.
And knowing, and like you said, sometimes we don't ask because we're afraid to get that response. And for a parent or a guardian that's taking care of a child, that's the last thing that you ever want to, expect your child to be that sad,
Yes.
that desperate that they want to take their own life. Can we go back a little bit to the Suicide Advisory
Yes.
Council that you're on? Now, you're working together with DEMIS and the State Department of Public Health. What is that relationship like?
Yeah, so we are co-project directors in a lot of suicide prevention grants that we receive from the federal government. So the Department of Public Health takes a public health approach. The Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services really focuses on the adult population, and then the Department of Children, we're involved as it relates to our youth here in Connecticut. There's a tri-chair of that Connecticut Suicide Advisory Board, which is a DCF and a DEMIS representative, as well as somebody from the community. So we have Ann Daigle, who is from a foundation, the Brian Daigle Foundation, and we co-chair a lot of the events that happen related to the suicide prevention efforts here in Connecticut. So there are signage at every train station that says 988 and Hope is out there. There's been posters put in schools. We work with local health departments on suicide prevention, health, promotion. So there's a lot of joint effort that happens because truly, again, one life lost is too many. And so we really want to promote and let people know that hope is out there. And, we want folks to know where to turn to. 988 is a great start. Another resource specific for children is Connecting to Care, CT.org, where families can go and figure out, okay, I have questions about what might be the right fit for my child and what they're experiencing. So there's something called an AIM tool, which is an assisted intervention matching. And essentially what it is it's a bunch of questions that you answer, and it'll pop out an answer that says, this is the most appropriate type of therapy. And here are the agencies that does it.
Wow. That's such a great tool, such a user-friendly tool for our families. And how is that information getting out there that families know? Is it after they've initiated a call, they'll be referred to this tool?
So that's a tool that anybody can access just by going to that website. So the Connecting to Care, CT.org is a website that anybody can go to. There's a lot of information on there about behavioral health supports and resources, ranging from anything from suicide prevention to substance misuse. There's a lot of resources for families. There's also care coordination agencies. So if you're really lost and don't know what to do, there's care coordinators that can help navigate the system for you and help kind of guide families to what the resources they need are. And all of that information is available to anyone from that website.
And they can do that on their own. They don't have to actually navigate that with someone else.
Yeah.
You talked about people with lived experience. Are people with lived experience a part of the council?
Yes, they are. So we have a very robust and active council, and part of that is our lived experience subcommittee. They provide that voice that we need to hear, right, for those who have lost a loved one or who have experienced suicidal thoughts themselves, so that we're making sure that we're responding to the way that they need when they need it, right? So they are able to give us a lot of information about, the marketing strategies and what we're promoting and how language should be. Language is so important in terms of how we say things and what we say. So it's really important that we hear from them and their experience, right? Because we want to do it right. And so having them as part of that council is very important.
So can you talk to our viewers about a parent? So oftentimes parents are afraid to call the Department of Children and Families to seek support or ask a question because they believe that if they do so, they may have a case may get opened on their family. So they feel a little bit vulnerable about making that call. What would happen if a parent called our agency and they expressed this concern over the well-being, the mental health of their child? What would that call look like? Yeah,
it's a great question because I think sometimes that fear stops people from asking, right? And the thing to know is that the the hotline or the care line, if they do call, if it is a behavioral health need, it doesn't even need to go the route of DCF. What we will do is we will offer you the resource, and we partner with an agency in the community called CareLawn, where they provide some oversight, and it's called a community pathways, right? So this is a way that communities can access support without even the need for DCF to become involved. A lot of the resources that I'm talking about are not even DCF involved families, right, that access them. These are families in the community that have a behavioral health need, and they're able to access that all throughout, not needing DCF involvement at all. They can call CareLawn directly if they'd like, or they can call our care line, and they will be able to assess what the needs are, and then match that family to the supports that they need directly.
So talk about that pathway. Is it the pathway to the services that CareLawn is assisting the families with?
Yeah, it's a great question. So CareLawn, what they would do, and it sounds very similar to CareLine.
I know.
But CareLawn, what they would do is they would really meet with the family, get a full assessment of what the issues are, right? So they'll be looking for what is the needed support from their family's perspective, what is going on with the child. Once they do that assessment, they'll really guide the family, make the referrals, help the family to make those referrals to the right service or support that's needed. Whether that's a community clinic that they need to be connected to, whether it's help a little bit in terms of like navigating the insurance or financial burden, they're able to help support the family in that way and really match them to the right service. I think sometimes it's always about that match, right? And finding the right service. And so they'll be able to navigate the system a little bit because they know what the landscape looks like. They're professionals that will be able to help really guide the family to the direction that they need.
Right, just like a navigator would
Exactly.
be. So what would be, so if one of our viewers is watching and they feel like, okay, I have these options that I didn't know were available to me, what would be the difference, or what would be the situation that would make a family decide to stop at a crisis center today as opposed to making the call and going the CareLawn route?
Yeah, crisis is really self-determined. But you think of like the level of intensity of what's going on. If it's something that can wait and they, want to sort of get guidance around what is needed, they can go that CareLawn route, where it's just going to take a little bit longer because they're doing a full assessment. But if the crisis is immediate, if there's a concern right now, or there's some concern that things have escalated to a point that if you don't intervene sooner, that something negative is going to happen. That's where you can pick up that phone and either have Mobile Crisis come to you in that moment, and Mobile Crisis typically gets to families within 45 minutes of that phone call. Or they can take their child and drive to the closest UCC and meet somebody there. Not everybody wants somebody coming into their home, which is completely understandable. So we have built this system that allows for self-direction, right? You can choose, do you want someone to come to you, or would you like to go somewhere?
And the 988 telephone number that you can call, and that's open to any age, within obvious reason, but can somebody use that 988 to call on behalf of someone else?
Absolutely. We actually do have many people who call on behalf of somebody. If they're worried about how to help somebody, or they're with somebody and that person is in too much distress to call for themselves, 988 is absolutely used by others to call on behalf of a loved one or a friend or something. So when they call, they'll ask some demographic questions. They'll ask, who are you calling on behalf of? And they'll guide that person who does call. And Mobile Crisis can be accessed through that 988 as well.
So if any of our viewers are watching right now and they've taken in all of this information, what would be your best advice, Dr. Bozak, in your role at DCF? If someone is concerned about their child, who should they call today? What would you say is the first call that they should make? If it's not, they're not in crisis at this moment, but they're concerned, what would you advise?
So I think the first thing would be ask the question of your child, right? See where they're at and ask those questions. If you know that they need support and you want to find out more, they can absolutely go to connectingtocarect.org and look at the resources there. There's a neat little tool that's a map that they can actually click on where they live to find the resources in their area as well. So it gets really specific and guides families to exactly what they need. And that website is a wealth of information that families can go to if if they're just not sure where to start. If they do have an immediate crisis, then 988 is the best place to start.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything we've missed, anything you want to cover before we close our show today?
I think the only thing that I would add is that there is hope out there. And so it's really important to reach out and get that help.
And they're not alone.
Exactly.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. I myself have learned so much in speaking to you today. Thank you for being a guest on our show. Thank you for watching Doors to Hope and Healing. If you're concerned about your child or your loved one, please call 988, and the website for connecting you to the resources that are available will be on our screen. Thank you again for watching.
Sometimes life just happens. Don't worry. Farmington Motorsports will get you back on the road and at a fair price. From towing to tires, emissions to transmissions.
Our ASC certified techs do it all.
Farmington Motorsports is a family-run business. We're a Napa Auto Center and AAA approved. We work on all makes and models from preventative maintenance to major repairs.
And every repair is backed by our 2-year, 24,000-mile nationwide warranty.
When life happens to you, don't worry. Farmington Motorsports.
Hello, I'm Bill Meyer, Board Director for Nutmeg TV, your local public TV station. For over 30 years now, Nutmeg has brought countless local events, municipal meetings, and programs to our TV screens. To continue this important work, Nutmeg relies on the support of generous individuals like yourself. So we're reaching out today to ask for your monetary support. Together we can continue to amplify the voices and stories that make our community unique and vibrant.
To make a donation, simply visit our website at nutmegtv.com or call the office at 860-321-7405 for assistance.